Oh, go on.
I feel stupid bringing it up.
Mate, if it helps.
Well, I've actually read all the Twilight books.
Director Taylor Martin and writer Simon Phillips are clearly fans of Tarantino, and they bring us Silent Bite, a vampire-themed Christmas horror movie. And this movie focuses on a group of armed bank robbers just after they have committed a robbery and got away with $1 million in cash, and they hold up at a hotel which happens to be full of vampires. And it's effectively a case of vampires versus robbers. So let's discuss what we think about Silent Bite and why the Tarantino comparison. Okay, so the movie's broad storyline is very similar in a way to From Dusk Till Dawn, which obviously was not directed by Tarantino, but he was involved. And the actual kind of the way this movie kind of dialogue is filmed is very reminiscent of Tarantino. In actual fact, they do something where, like in Reservoir Dogs, where all of the robbers don't know each other's real names and use kind of Christmas code names and stuff. And there's an argument about who gets the best at the code names, very much like Reservoir Dogs. So the influences here are plain to see. So if you like a B-movie version of Tarantino, then you may want to check it out. But yes, the story, again, you've got a group of armed criminals holed up in a recreational building filled with vampires, and you know the kind of the fight ensues. Again, very similar to Dusk Till Dawn. So what did I like about this movie? I have to say it starts strong. We've got a great kind of animated opening sequence with the credits showing the robbery. We don't actually see that again very much like Reservoir Dogs, but it sets up a sort of like a stylistic kind of movie in a way. And I have to say, I think it's a fun idea having these kind of these robbers dressed up in kind of Santa costumes, and some of the logic that they use for doing this is actually fairly sound, because the robbery they commit is on Christmas Eve, and they do this because they know that the police won't want to be out blocking roads and stuff on Christmas Eve, which sort of makes sense. And I guess the whole concept here of wearing Santa costumes is obviously there's going to be a whole bunch of people wearing Santa costumes, so I guess it makes sense. I mean, it's fairly easy to kind of spot rather than more innocuous clothes, but you know, I guess there's some logic there, I would say. And I have to say, even though this movie is clearly influenced by Tarantino, I actually did kind of quite like the interplay between this group of kind of criminals. Interesting that they kind of go for, a lot of them are, well, there's not a huge amount of them, but some of them are British, which kind of gives it this kind of Cockney sort of style gangster aesthetic with it. So I kind of quite, obviously being a Brit myself, I kind of quite like the that sort of sarcastic kind of style banter between these kind of this group of criminals and stuff. They're a mix between British and I guess American or Canadian or what have you. But yeah, I sort of quite liked that sort of snarky sort of attitude. And I have to say, I thought our group of robbers were quite compelling characters. We get, not a huge amount of them, but we get enough so we have a reasonable amount of kind of protagonists, and they all get their kind of own sort of personality quirks and kind of things like that, which I kind of quite liked. In them is this kind of guy who I suppose is our main protagonist, who is really a young guy who's out of his depth and trying to do a bank heist to pay off gambling debts, but he is really not a hardened criminal like the rest of them, and he's really our sort of POV character, I would say. But I actually kind of quite liked the kind of the interplay and our sort of characters, and I have to say I think the acting for our group of criminals was reasonable. Again, it's a somewhat of a comedic movie, so it's not exactly high art, but I gotta say, I think they did a good job mixing that balance between having, you know, some sort of believability in their characters, but also having a kind of somewhat comedic edge to them as well. And let's talk about the comedic edge, because I do think there's actually got some quite funny lines of dialogue in here. It's not a full-on comedy. I wouldn't call this a horror comedy. I would say it's comedic. But there are a few kind of lines here that I think do have some legitimately kind of funny payoffs and things. So that was kind of quite fun, really. So yeah, I mean, the idea, I think, is fairly kind of solid, and we do learn a little bit about the sort of the world of these vampires that's in there, specifically trying to target these criminals because they can't really call anyone for help, which I thought was kind of interesting. It hints to, like, well, how much do they know and things, and there's also like a loan shark guy that sort of turns up, and it almost points to, okay, there's things happening outside of in this hotel. It hints at it, doesn't really do much more with it, I would say, but yeah, it kind of, at least there's an element here where you think it's more than dumb luck. Where this movie does not work, unfortunately, is the vampires themselves. In actual fact, these vampires suck. Okay, why? By comparison to our group of robbers, the acting is horrible. Now, it's universally horrible, which makes me think this is more of the direction. Our vampires are like really like over the top in the sort of, I'm kind of a gothic vampire. And like the over the top like hissing with the kind of the fangs and the way their dialogue is done. It is horrible. It actually feels like a parody at times. So the acting, be it the actual actresses or the direction, wasn't good. The vampires seem rubbish, to be honest. But it's not only that, the vampires don't really ever seem to threaten our robbers all that much. I mean, now, there's good setup in this movie, but the setup maybe lasts too long because our robbers don't really become aware of the vampires until sort of 20 minutes to the end of the movie. So there's a long time really sort of setting up, and then we have these kind of vampires versus robbers 20 minutes to the end of the movie, and probably about 15 minutes until the beginning of the credits. So it's kind of like it's a little late, and as such, we never really get the sense that these vampires are preying and stalking. It's all sort of quite truncated, and once our group of robbers are able to figure out maybe a way to fight back, it never really feels like a massive struggle. So our vampires are very nerfed in a way. I mean, yeah, they're up there. There's a body count, but it really doesn't have much in the way of, if you excuse the pun, stakes. Or it just doesn't feel dangerous. It doesn't feel like they're a legitimate threat in some respects. It feels hokey and silly, and as I've mentioned, it's sort of they're there like laying this trap for the robbers. Although I don't really know how they knew all about that, and it's just, well, I don't know. It seems a little bit sort of like a decent setup, but as the film goes on, it kind of makes a little less sense, and you're thinking, why are these kind of robbers really not keeping themselves to themselves? They're walking around in kind of either a Santa suit with guns out or like body armor and stuff. It's very like they're not being innocuous at all. Yeah, it kind of falls apart, unfortunately. The concept is fun, but as the film goes on, it just kind of goes off the rails. It still has some entertainment value, but it never really lives up to, I think, the good premise that it sort of sets up. and actually ends up being quite bad in places, to be honest, particularly the scenes that directly involve the vampires. They're just not very well performed, and they don't even look particularly strong. Like I said, there's too much. I always think some of the, especially low budget vampire films, we've got to show the fangs. You know, we need to show that the fangs are here, and it really looks unnatural, and they're hissing, and they've got like black sort of like vein eye makeup that looks like eye makeup. It's just not strong at the end, which is a shame because it squanders quite a fun setup, even though it's kind of somewhat kind of similar to Dusk Till Dawn, but there you go. But I will give it a 5 out of 10 because it does have entertainment value if you don't have a particularly kind of high threshold for quality. Let's just say that. So 5 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time.